I'm very honored to be here with these two women who need no introductions. I want to talk about how this book came to be, and I want to begin with the scarf that I probably shouldn't shouldn't move too much with because of the microphone, but this is the scarf that launched 1,000 ships. And this is a scarf that my mother gave me at the end of her life when she lived in an assisted living facility, and it was purchased from some vendors who came to these places during the holidays. And she gave it to me, and she died 2, 3, 4 years later, I'm not sure when. But she had a lot of dementia, and I started wearing the scarf right away in the winter, and I always wore it with a dark coat, and almost every time I wore it, people would say, "Oh my God, what a beautiful scarf." And then they'd say, "Where did you get it?" And I would sort of like freeze. And I'd say, "Oh, my mother got it for me," and I never knew what to say, and it sounded so inelegant, and usually you'd want to say, "Oh, she got it at Bloomingdale's," or "She got it here," or "She got it there," and I just would say, "And she and it all sounded kind of sad, and it made me choke, as it does right now. And I became obsessed with this scarf, and I became obsessed with what it meant to me, and the idea that it was around my neck, and I hadn't been very close to my mother in real life, so this was very weird that I had this connection to the scarf. And I became really sort of obsessed with it, but I never said a word to anyone, even my closest companions. And one day I said, well, I wonder if other women have a gift like that from their mothers that really just encapsulates the whole relationship. And here we are. And I started, of course, asking people. And you know, when you start something like this, you don't really know what's going to happen. You don't know whether you're going to get people who say that they have something or that they have something to write. So it's all a bit of a crapshoot, or maybe. Thank you, thanks. And then you don't know what the essays will be like when you get them, and you don't know, whether they'll put a good cover on it. I mean, there's a million things that could go right and could go wrong. But I just want to read very briefly from the introduction, which I wrote, of course, after I received all these pieces. Singly, each piece is a gem to me, a gathering in of memory, affection, and gratitude, however tormented the relationships once were. Taken together, the pieces have a force that feels as elemental as the tides, outpourings of lightness and darkness, simple joy and devastating grief, mother love and daughter love, mother love and daughter rage, the anguish of suffering mothers and daughters powerless to help them, and the spoken and unspoken weight of missing all the mothers who are gone. As essay after essay reveals, a single gift can easily tell the story of an entire life. Yet for all the richness here, it's striking how modest almost all of these gifts are. A used cake pan, a homemade quilt, a walk, a Mexican blouse, a family photograph. It just might be, after all, that it's the thought that counts, and the packaging too. I don't mean the paper and the ribbons, but the emotional wrapping, the occasion for the gift, the spirit in which it was given, and everything that happened before and after. This is another way of saying that as gift givers and recipients, whether we are mothers, daughters, aunts, sisters, or cherished friends, we may not know for quite some time which presents will matter most. So I want to ask Eleanor and Susan about the experience of being asked to write the essays and the experience of writing the essays, and then I'm going to ask you to each read a short section. So Eleanor, do you want to start?
Well, I just got an email from Elizabeth, and I don't know you or didn't know you, but it sounded intriguing, and it also, I think you initially asked for like just 500 words, and so I thought, oh, easy.
Easy.
Okay, so it got me thinking, and I think I did the 500. I think it grew to 1,000, and she's a terrific editor. She came back and she probed, and she got me to elaborate. And I'm thinking I need to write a memoir one of these days. This is a good way to get started in thinking about my mother, is good part of a memoir. So thank you for
great.
that. And shall I read a bit? Okay. Okay. I don't have many material things from my mother, Inna Jacine Japin Roloffs. She wasn't a material girl. She was an immigrant from the tiny island of Föhr, that's F-O-H-R with an umlaut over the O, in the North Sea off Germany and Denmark, who came to America at 19 years old in 1923, newly married to my father, who was 10 years older than she was. Seasick all the way, she came through Ellis Island and told me once that she would never have agreed to the journey if she'd known it would be for good. But she put any regrets aside to create a life with my father, working with him in the delicatessen they owned together, initially in Brooklyn and then during most of my growing up in Queens. Mom wore sturdy shoes with wedge heels, and I don't remember any makeup in the house except an occasional lipstick for church on Sunday. But she had a stash of jewelry that I knew was special, even as a young girl. Yet she never wore any of the pieces and kept them wrapped in soft material in a dresser drawer, as you would keep precious silverware. By the time I saw the jewelry she had brought with her from Europe, she had been in her adoptive country for more than 2 decades. The horrors of World War II had ended their visits to the German-owned North Sea island she called home, and when she occasionally took out the dozen or so pieces to polish them, she told me that in the salt air of the island, they didn't tarnish the way they did in America. It was a prideful comparison, one of the few she could find in those post-war years. While the jewelry represents the continuity of my unique heritage, the other item that my mother didn't intend to give me, but that I think of as a gift from her, is much more mundane. It was a can of Johnson paste wax that she kept in a mesh bag in the car for her visits to my father's grave out near Kennedy Airport, so she could polish the marker. She went every week, and as I think about it, that was probably why she learned how to drive at age 60 after he died. For me, it was a powerful lesson in love and loyalty and the enduring gestures that matter. And you can see how these essays catch the throat.
Of course.
And when you come up, I have the box with the jewelry that you can look at, plus a little pamphlet about the island of Föhr for any tourists.
You're doing some tourism promotion. Susan.
Me. Hi. I know Liz a long time, a little bit before I said we were classmates together at Barnard, right? I'm about 40 years older than she, but we went to the same women's school and we were neighbors over here for quite some time. And I loved that email from you and the idea, the chance, you know, so much of it made me feel as if this is going to be wonderful because I'll get to be with my mother for a while. I'll just get to sit there and write. And I want you to meet her before I start to read. This is Anne Rosalind Rosenberg. She became Levitt a few months after this picture was taken. This is her engagement picture. She's 28 years old in it, and I think it's like 1934 or so. She's quite beautiful. And the gift, which she did not give me, it was a gift that was given to her, I didn't bring. Oh darn, but I have to play with my phone a little to show you. When you come up, I'll show it a little better. It's an amethyst ring. It looks bigger, and it's big, but it looks bigger in this picture. Anyway, get a sense of it. And that's what I'm writing about. And the piece is called Truths in a Ring, as in Ring of Truth. I mean, you do what you can. You know. Oedipus Schmedipus, the old joke went, as long as you love your mother. And I did, as did my father. But did he love her more than he loved me? I was much too young when he gave her that ring to understand that there were different kinds of love, different kinds of loving. I was an only child, adored and pampered. When he handed her a small package for her birthday, I thrust out my pudgy 5-year-old hand and grabbed it. Oh no, darling, that's not for you. It's for Mommy. Yes, sweetheart, today is my birthday. Daddy's giving me a present. What? This was impossible. Every brightly wrapped and ribbon box I'd ever seen had been for me. And not this one? With her lilting, lovely voice, which taught me so much and read me so many books and drilled me years later again with such attentive love on boring French verb endings, she was carefully giving me an early, difficult lesson in relationships and possession and consideration. These lessons always were her greatest gifts to her only daughter. And I'll jump a little bit to the end here and just read you. Just, okay?
Sure, yeah.
Just a little bit. Anne Rosalind Rosenberg Levitt died in 2003, 3 months short of her 97th birthday. By the way, she was a pack-a-day smoker until almost the very end. Going through her things, papers, clothes, jewelry, all the stuff of life, I came across the amethyst ring in the bottom of her jewelry box. Mom had had some simple diamond jewelry, which I've passed along to my daughter-in-law, and her pretty but not very expensive costume things I distributed to family and friends. But the amethyst ring rests in my bureau drawer. I've never worn it. It's not my style at all. But it sits there like an old story, a lesson in the loves and losses of life. And most important, the ring is a reminder of the major things she gave me: kindness, attention, affection, a lifetime of love.
Hey. When we were going back and forth about how this event would go, Susan, the radio producer,
Oh, God.
gave me the whole plan.
I merely suggested.
And she said, "Feel free to reject. Feel free to reject it."
And you do?
And I did. I listened. No, of course I said, "So many good ideas, Susan."
Because she's a great editor.
But I did take one of her ideas, and so this is the part where this is Susan's idea, that each of them is going to read a brief section from somebody else's essay, and just to give you a flavor of some of the other essays. And do you want to?
Yes, I chose Reverend Lillian Daniel. When I was a toddler, my journalist father covered the Vietnam War, moving in and out of the war zone for weeks at a time. Whenever he returned home, he brought a piece of Asian pottery to add to my mother's collection. The vase was one of the finest he'd found, and he wrapped it in brown paper and string and carried it carefully on several airplanes and buses before finally walking up the driveway with it in his hands. That was the moment I, at 2 years old, saw him and rushed forward. Surprised and elated, my father opened his arms. As I fell into them, the vase fell out and smashed into pieces. My father gasped, but my mother had no concern for the broken vase. She was just delighted to see me in my daddy's arms. Later that night, my mother pulled out the glue, clumsily repaired the vase, and pronounced it precious. It remains a symbol to me of why so many people loved her and mourned her passing. There was no situation she didn't think could be repaired and redeemed, including her own illness. It surprised her by taking her from this world at the age of 60. She could always see the beauty in broken things, including in me. When I went through a brief stage at Yale Divinity School, attempting to adopt what I thought was the look of a serious student, in baggy linen dresses and stern glasses, she had to intervene. "Darling, it is wonderful that you want to be a minister," she said, "but I'll be damned if I will tolerate you dressing like a missionary." And I love that because mothers, they know how to do it.
Weren't you interested in how often, I mean, so many themes weave together in a repeated way throughout these stories, and the stories are by young, old, black, white, it was everybody. So many good cooks here, which was interesting to see, how many women are writing about their mothers and remembering what their mothers cooked for them, but also clothing, appearance, how you look, how, as this one, and how you present yourself to the world.
Well, two anecdotes stick. I mean, I don't even remember which essay they're in. One is a mother who did these elaborate dinners, and she cooked a duck, and she had all these garnishes around it, and she had 10 people around the table, and she came out, and the duck slid off the plate.
She tripped.
She tripped. Okay, and then she just, pulled herself up and said, "I'll be right back. I'll throw this duck away. I'll be back with the other duck." And everybody went along with it. And another mother who covered up for all cooking mistakes, saying, "Oh, that's how they do it in France." Anyway, it's great.
Shall I read a
Susan,
little
yes.
bit? You have to pronounce, I don't know how to say her name.
Oh, her name is Maymeve Medwed.
Medwed.
Yeah.
And the piece is called Wait Till You See What I Found For You. My mother gave me many gifts. Her love of humor, peanut butter cups, Dorothy Parker, New Yorker cartoons, Cole Porter, flea markets, libraries, steamed lobsters, I really love this writing, raw peas fresh out of the pod, and silver candlesticks. And even though my father's 12-year illness forced her into pinching pennies, she relished the rare grand gesture, the Waldo Pierce painting, a restaurant filet mignon, the right side of the menu be damned, the fur-colored coat she bought me for my 21st birthday. Every treat teetered on the seesaw between need and indulgence. As a result, she refused to buy a new refrigerator, thus requiring the repairman to pay so many service calls we began to claim him as a relative. And forget any dryer to accompany the washer that shook our floors with hurricane gale force the minute it segued into spin. Condemned to the backyard clothesline, our sheets froze into rectangles fringed with icicles. She also nixed pajama party compulsory Lands nightgowns. Anybody remember those? And toasty boots for the 1.5-mile walk to school. Deprivation built character. Surprising extras provoke cartwheels of ecstasy in my younger sister and me. And what she ends up giving, I say her name again,
Maymeve.
Maymeve, and her husband, years later in life, is a bullfinch door that has been rescued from a house that's going to be demolished. And they restore it, and it hangs. I think that's such a wonderful symbol of a gift.
Front door.
Front door.
Front door.
A symbol from a parent, don't you? It opens to adventure, it closes to safety. A door is just so symbolic of so many things. I love this story.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about the book, and my experience of the book, when people say, well, what did you learn or how did you experience the books, was I had a very unhappy story. My mother had an unhappy story. So my kind of whole view of the book is there are happy mothers and unhappy mothers,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. That was sort of as far as I can go. No, I mean, I'm kidding, but there is a huge difference between the people who had happy mothers and the people who had unhappy
Yes.
mothers. And I think Maymeve had a happy mother.
Yes.
Your
do
mother,
too.
your mother had a hard life. I'm not sure she was. I don't think of her as unhappy. I think of that.
My mother just worked all the time.
Yeah, she
and
really-
I say in the story, she worked in the store. She made the rice pudding, the custards, and she cleaned everything she could find and see. But what she said about cleaning always was she liked to see where she'd been. So, you don't want to dust every day. So I picked up a lot of these little hints. My mother had a good life, but she died with Alzheimer's at age 69. And so there's no way to make that pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of dementia in these stories,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is kind of a
Curse.
Yeah.
curse. That's right.
But one of what I say to people is all the people who have sad mothers, those are my friends. And in many cases they are, friends, writer friends. And one of but the piece that I want to read from is by Judith Hillman Patterson, who was my friend in Washington and whom I met in Washington around, we edited the Washington Book Review together, not the Washington Post Book Review, but a little magazine called the Washington Book Review. And And Judy is from Alabama, from Montgomery, and her mother had died when she was 9 of alcoholism. And Judy was the oldest child, and all of her other siblings had fetal alcohol syndrome, which nobody knew what it was. But they knew that all these children had problems, and this was more than 70 years ago. So, and so Judy is writing about the year and a half of sobriety that her mother had when Judy was, right before she died, when she was about 8, between 8 and 9. And that's the gift. And what she did when she was in her 50s is, after everybody else in her family died, she began writing about her family and doing all this research. She was a writer and a journalist and a scholar, and so she spent many years writing this book. And I'm going to read from the very end of her essay. And her parents were from Montgomery. Her mother's family had been slave owners, and her father's family had started the first black colleges in the South. So their marriage was sort of like a civil war. She writes, I spent the next 10 years, this is after her father and sibling have died. I spent the next 10 years digging through family documents, interviewing lost relatives and friends, trudging from my house to the Library of Congress and the National Archives, and traveling across the Deep South, Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, and New York, trying to understand my family and the meaning of Mama's death. It didn't take long to locate the mighty river of depression, anxiety, and addiction that ran in her family. There was something else, too, harder to define. A certain lack of meaning in their lives or faith in themselves, some way in which they did not know for sure who they were. After years of slogging through documents and archives, I began to see my family heritage as a microcosm of the bone-deep conflicts in the history of Alabama, the Deep South, and the country itself. Yet now and then, amid all the information and note-taking, I'd find myself possessed of full-blown scenes from my childhood, which I called bubbles of memory. Many of them came from that time with my mother during the war, when her mother was sober. Slowly, these long-ago days began to shine like new gold in my mind as I saw how events were connected and how important that period had been to me. No matter what time of day or night a bubble appeared, I'd have to write it down, get out of bed and go to the computer, or grab the back of an envelope, or drive off the interstate into a McDonald's and write on that thin paper they put your tray on. Bit by bit, that long banished time fell into place and put my mother back into the story of my life. I think now of those precious wartime months as the gift twice given. As the gift to my childhood, Mama's devotion at that time strengthened my sense of my own worth and enabled me to survive and go on without her. 40 years later, the memory of that gift and the loss of it brought her back to me in a way that could at last be shared and grieved. Mama getting a parrot to talk, Mama at the kitchen table teaching me my part in a play, Mama scrubbing Noxie's apartment and packing the trunks. I remember I had a mother. She loved me.
Oof. You know, that's like a little novel. I mean, a big novel in a few pages.
Yeah.
That story. It's so powerful.
She actually wrote this story became a wonderful memoir called Sweet Mystery that came out about 15 years ago, which I recommend. So, you know, what's amazing about this book is all this power in these very short essays. I mean, they're not, you know, there's only one piece that's longer than, 7 pages, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and each one of them is so concentrated. The emotion is so concentrated. I wonder if both of you are journalists by trade, and here you were writing something that's much more, much not journalistic, it's much more personal, and I wonder what that was like for you. Was it sort of awkward, or was it fun, or was it a relief, or?
It was hard to do, I mean, because it was an exercise against all of my training, pretty much. But it was such a luxury, too, to be asked to do that. The only stumbling place was there were times when, as an only child, my father's gone and my mother, there was no one to call. I could not call my mother who was as much my memory as anything else, and ask her how it really was. And so that, you know, each time, that happens almost every day to me, interestingly enough. She died in 2003. And I just think about her so often these days as I get older. And I think back to what her life was when she was my age, and how she handled herself, and how she would have dealt with this situation or that one. Because she had great wisdom. She had good street sense, lovely sense of humor as well. And Barbara, where are you? I'm thinking in this bookstore, that book, the last book I did a long time ago called Talk, I had a signing here, and my mother sat around there, and I was up a little closer to you all talking and reading. But she sat, you had a wing chair in the store then, and she sat back in that wing chair, and many of my friends came, people who I'd grown up with, gone to college with, and they all crowded her. She was like a queen. She was just so lovable and outgoing and sweet and sociable. And there she was, sort of holding court. It was great. I knew she was having a great evening out that time. It's just how she was. So it was lovely, as I said before, to be able to spend that kind of time with her at a computer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's find out what the audience wants to know from us. Okay, where's that?
The microphone is right over there.
Okay, oh, it's right, okay. Anybody?
Well, I'll fill this space a little bit. I came to admire my mother a lot more than I did, I think, when she was alive, because I really understood more of what she went through and how brave she was. I mean, when my father died, she was 60 years old. She'd never driven. And, you know, she was determined to learn how to drive. And it was only in writing this essay that I understood what her motivation was, so that she could drive out to that
That's
cemetery.
amazing.
Yeah.
There was a
That's so
dedication
touching.
there that, you know,
Yeah.
you don't see a whole lot. So I felt really proud of her
Yes.
at the end
That's
of
nice.
writing this.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm here tonight because my mom called me up to invite me, and
Yes.
she enticed me by telling me that Susan Stamberg was going to be here.
Thank you.
But one thing I'm curious about is my mom's mom lived into her 90s, and so I grew up my whole life, and as an adult as well, you know, very aware of their relationship, my mom with her mom, and you know, I feel like that has really, you know, affected me or influenced me, seeing her care for her mom as an old woman, and going through that process of having her parent grow old and being her companion and help her. So, so I hope I will be as you know, a good daughter to my mom as she
Well,
was
you've
to
had
her
a
mom.
wonderful role model, two of them. So.
But I'm wondering if any of you have any comments about the way that you saw your mothers with their mothers, if they ever talked about that. Like, now we know a lot about you and your moms, but did you have that experience of your own mothers talking about their relationships with their own mothers?
I'll tell you one story that comes to mind that I remember my mother telling me about her mother. Her mother was a very small, old world lady. They'd come over, she and my grandfather, from Lithuania, I think it was, from Vilnius, where they had met and married. And she, I don't even remember her speaking English. I think it was mostly Yiddish in the house. So she was really old world. She was from another world. And my mother honored her enormously. But I experienced more as I got older, because I was pretty young when my grandmother died, my mother's relationship and caring for her father. I was older, and so I could witness that. But I'll tell you this one story that my mother told me so many years later. I'm Jewish, and my mother was raised, I wouldn't say an Orthodox home, but it was kosher and it was observant. We were not. And the evidence was the little white Christmas tree with blue lights that was in my parents' home from pretty much the time I was born. And my mother told me this story, that they had moved into a new apartment and invited her parents over. and she, at Christmas, around that time, and she was so nervous, she said, about what would the reaction be of my parents, and especially my mother, what would she have to say about all of this? And she said her parents came into the apartment, looked around, and my grandmother said to her, "What a lovely apartment this is, darling." And not a word more was said. I think that's such a wonderful story. You know, it's so typical of those women. You know, it's sort of again, the love, the enormous tact, a kind of denial of making the best of a situation, an absence of cynicism. I mean, it just, to me, says so much. I love that story. So I hope that's an answer to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know how you
Hi,
came, how you came up with the people who were the contributors, and did you send out a lot of emails that you didn't get a response to?
How I came up with them, I chose people who were essayists or were, you know, novel. I had journalists, novelists, and poets, but I chose people who were used to being writers, and who had, you know, a lot of credentials as writers, and I was more interested in people who were experienced getting things done as writers, you know, and then I wanted some kinds of age differences and cultural differences, and then there were people who I knew had interesting stories about their mothers, you know, and so I asked them, and I asked probably a third more people than you know are in the book, and then I asked some people who said it's too hard, it's too complicated. You know, they had, you know, and I think if your mother is alive and you have a complicated relationship with her, you know, you might not do it. And in a certain way, the book I really wanted to do was how your relationship with your mother changes, or how your thoughts about your mother changes after she dies. That was really what I was interested in. And then the gift thing just became almost a way to do that.
Well, that's your story.
That was my
Hers
story.
is an incredibly powerful story.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish you'd read. Do you feel like reading just a little bit of yours?
Sure.
It's really first rate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
I thought you'd never ask.
That wasn't even in the script.
I will read my mother was in a nursing home, and I had a very distant relationship with her. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about doing this book is that whenever there were books about mothers and daughters or mothers or articles, I wouldn't read them because I just couldn't connect with anything that people said about their mothers. I was just kind of, it was just very alien to me. And so now here I am, you know, talking about my mother all the time. But not talking about my mother, but talking to people about their mothers. Yeah. And one of the things that people say to me is, I hope this isn't just a book about happy mothers and daughters, because I'm not really interested. I had a terrible relationship with my mother. I don't want to read a book about happy mothers and daughters. I say, don't worry. There are plenty of unhappy stories here. But it is interesting, and some people say, you know, I picked up this book and I thought it would just be really sappy. But it's not, you know. So this is about the scarf, and my mother's in a nursing home. The scarf didn't literally glitter, but it had a glittering effect, or so it felt to me. It caught people's attention often for many months every year when I wore it, for the next 3 years in which my mother declined, and then declined precipitously. She was 10 years younger than her sister, but she died a year before. It is painful to remember the years after she gave me the scarf, the journey from the assisted living building to the nursing home, from the floor of okay residence to the floor of the decidedly not okay. I spent a lot of time visiting her and my aunt, who remained on the okay floor until she died. I can't bear to remember the actual names of the floors, the conditions they referred to. Before the worst of it, visiting was heartbreaking, but also strangely tranquilizing. I sometimes stayed for hours, just sitting with my mother and aunt, watching TV, eating meals, sometimes taking my mother to the art studio. My mother was a painter. Sometimes taking my mother to the art studio or walking past the electric train set and into the gardens that overlooked the Hudson River. There were musicians who came to sing and play the piano, and a kindly rabbi who conducted services and knew everyone's name. One of the last times I pushed my mother's wheelchair to the end of the hall to take in the breathtaking view of the George Washington Bridge over the water. It was late afternoon, and the sky was a dozen shades of orange. Liz, she said, "Did you make that?" She meant the landscape she saw against the window, a modern Hudson River school canvas. She still knew my name, but she had mistaken me for the painter when she was the painter in the family. No, Mom, God made that. It was not what I usually thought or said about landscape or anything else, but it must have made sense in that moment. The years of caretaking softened my hard edges and rubbed away a lifetime of distance between us. And the scarf, the beautiful scarf that everyone notices and asks about, does a motherly job year in and year out, protects, warms, and reminds me, as though I could forget, that she is taking care of me.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're beginning to run out of time, so this is going to be the last question.
Okay. The reason I'm here is because I really was a classmate of Liz's at Barnard. and
One of the three people I knew at Barnard.
and our parents were both, I think, getting divorced, and my parents were having World War III, and if I remember, Liz's family situation was none too happy either. And then while we were at Barnard, I was running the newspaper, and Eleanor Clift kindly came to talk to the staff of the newspaper that year. So, yeah, and of course I'm a Susan Stamberg fan, like everybody else. But anyway, okay, so I have a quick comment and then a question. The comment is that I think this genre is very female, and so if there's a sequel, it should. My nominees would either be things my grandma gave me or things my daughter gave me. And because I think either of those, maybe one and then the other. So my question is, when I think about this, about if I were to write something about this, it just seems so hopelessly overwhelming and complicated and multifaceted. And so it fascinates me that you put this into such a short form. Oh, and so that's the question. But the other thing I wanted to just mention about Liz is that when we were 17 and freshmen in college, she always said she wanted to be a writer. And a lot of people said, "Oh, yeah, really?" And I've just taken a lot of pride in watching her do it and do it amazingly well. So
Thank you, Lisa.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my
What's your question?
really about I'm sorry. It got kind of too many things to say. Maybe that's just me. But my question is whether it was a struggle for the contributors to find a little piece that actually tells some piece of the whole, or whether you saw in the writing any tendency to simplify or sentimentalize.
Well, speaking for myself, no, I look at this all the time, and it's unique, and it's from this island, and it came to mind immediately. But then delving into it and finding the meaning, then, there may be a tendency to romanticize and that sort of thing. But, there were some unpretty parts to my mother's life, definitely. A too early death and a nasty Alzheimer's. And I had like one sentence. I didn't talk about how she went back to the island and died there.
She did.
Yes, well, because she kept wanting to go home, and foolishly we thought if we actually took her home, the restlessness, I'm sure many people have had experience with Alzheimer's, but there's a restlessness that's involved, and the pacing and the needing hands and wanting to, quote, go home, but there's, so we thought the island would be the perfect place. And it was a wonderful little nursing facility on the island. She went over in Thanksgiving one year, and she died in July the next year. And actually, they told us she never even got out of bed. So she was gone. And anyway, I jog. I eat right. I use my brain. My mother worked very hard, but she was not self-reflective. But she always just got on with it. If you had any malady, she thought it was in your head. Get your mind off it, Eleanor. And actually, it's been my mantra through my life. So I've gotten valuable lessons from her. But I also see that her life ended too soon and tragically. And I work very hard to do everything I can to avoid that fate. So.
But to answer that question,
Yeah.
I think what was so good was limiting it to the gift, because
Right.
anywhere, in any writing really, starting small, will give you the universe. When you begin with that focus and just go into it a little bit, you can fill in so much that's around it. I mean, our charge was not to present the life or the lives.
But that's what came out.
But yes, that was almost the byproduct of it, but
Yeah.
it wasn't the assignment.
Right. It's interesting. There was one day when I got 2 emails within like 5 minutes of each other, and these are both very accomplished writers. And one of them said, "I really hate this essay. I just hate it. I just can't stand it. And it's only 1,000 words, and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Just send it to me." And then 5 minutes later, I get an email. This essay, I just don't know. It's how long do you think these essays should be? And I said, I don't know, 2,000 words. And she said, I've got 4,700 words. And I thought, oh my God. And I said, well, send it to me, and I'll tell you what I think. And I'm a pretty good editor, so she sent it to me, and I read it, and I said, there's a paragraph on the bottom of page 6 that I would cut, and other than that, I wouldn't change a word.
Oh my!
That was Karen
goodness.
Carbo's
Yeah.
essay.
Wow.
No matter how many times I read that essay, I couldn't find one thing to take out of it. And the woman who'd written 1,000 words was tormented, and she hated it, and she hated it, and she hated it. And then it was published in a big magazine, and all of her daughter's friends read it, and she was so happy that they read this piece, because they don't read her other stuff.
Oh my God.
So there are all these kind of wonderful stories that came out of the book where people said, I don't have anything to write about. Oh, and then they write something. It's like Eleanor saying that she understood her mother differently after writing this essay. There was something that happened in the writing. And then I think there's something else actually that's happening in the book, all being together, and everybody's kind of going, "Oh, your mother did that. My one, you had an unhappy mother. I had an unhappy. You had a happy mother. Oh, isn't this interesting?" There's like a community that's come around it in a funny way, because we're all here. It's been kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And it just started.
It's a big relationship.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've given us all a wonderful gift tonight. Thank you.
You have too. You have too, Barbara.